The world we are set to explore in the upcoming Cyberpunk 2077 is not one we should wish to live in. This is true even dating back to the original tabletop games. As Cyberpunk creator Mike Pondsmith explains, Cyberpunk was a warning, not an aspiration. It may seem glossy on its surface, but it's a dystopia through and through, with vast portions of Earth basically uninhabitable and a history of pollution and warfare ripping the planet apart. It is inevitable to then wonder, with so much technological potential at the fingertips of humanity, how did the world of Cyberpunk fall apart so? Well, today, let's prepare for Cyberpunk 2077 by answering that very question. But before we get started, the dystopian YouTube landscape forces me to ask you to like the video and subscribe if you want to see more. You can also ring the bell so you never miss any other content like this. With Cyberpunk so close on the horizon, I have a lot of plans to jump into that game, looking at the lore and Easter eggs hidden throughout Night City. But with that out of the way, let's get to the topic at hand. The timeline of the Cyberpunk universe diverged at some point in the mid to late 20th century, as to be expected with a science fiction product first published in 1988. The Earth of this universe suffered through major conflicts between the 1990s, 2000s, and 2010s, when the United States launched a literal war on drugs in several South American countries. Additionally, there were 3 large-scale conflicts fought mostly between multinational corporations, or by governments on their behalf, appropriately called the 3 corporate wars. They also had the effect of strengthening the global positions of power for these megacorporations, connecting them with world governments to the point where political conflicts of interest ceased to be seen as issues. Somewhat terrifyingly, they were instead treated as advantageous. The more a politician was in the pocket of these companies, the more likely they were to succeed. This was particularly true in the United States. Corporations worldwide were basically given uncontested access and control over natural resources, and without oversight or regulation, environmental collapse and widespread climate change were inevitable. Deforestation in America became such a widespread issue that dust storms and acid rain rapidly became America's biggest problem. Many towns and cities, particularly in the Midwest, were deserted because they simply became impossible to live in. This was all accompanied by thermonuclear war in the Middle East, devastating the region and turning it into a wasteland, all while causing a global oil crisis. In an attempt to stymie the growing economic problems facing them, the United States covertly tampered with both the American and European stock markets. This plan backfired when details of their manipulation were leaked to the public, causing a worldwide financial meltdown that allowed corporations to seize even more power. Eventually, 4 American government agencies formed a coalition called the Gang of Four, launching a coup that effectively ended federal democracy in the country. In retaliation, many states seceded and declared themselves free states, collapsing the United States as we know it. It should be noted that a new American social class called nomads emerged during this time period. These were migrants between states, constantly searching for jobs, safety, peace from the ongoing political turmoil, and sadly, basic human necessities like food and water. And yet, with much of the world in economic devastation, the United States fractured and swaths of the world now unlivable, things only got worse with the advent of the 4th Corporate War. In its first stage, this conflict was called the Ocean War. In 2021, 2 oceanic exploitation companies, CINO, or Corporate Internationale Nauticale et Océanique, and OTEC, the Ocean Technology and Energy Corp, began a race to seize control of the assets of a third corporation, IHA, Internationale Handelsmarine Aktiengesellschaft. The rivalry was bitter and quickly escalated into armed hostilities. OTEC gained the upper hand by hiring the private military contractor Militech to protect its interests, and CINO responded in turn by contracting the similar PMC Arasaka. In the beginning, the actions taken were discreet. Mid-level corporate execs were assassinated, or dirty laundry was stolen and then made public. Occasionally, one side would hire mercenary hackers to attack the other's assets, wreaking havoc on the global economy. It got to the point that communications embargoes were placed on Arasaka and Militech, but the conflict was sadly only getting started. Eventually, the Eurobank was able to mediate a truce between Sino and OTEC, but the conflict between Arasaka and Militech continued to escalate despite their patrons brokering a peace. By 2022, the Ocean War officially transitioned into the Shadow War, fought by the two security companies. Mercenaries and hackers flocked to the banners of both corporations, and devastating raids between military bases and research facilities became commonplace. However, despite the open hostility of their ground war, the worst of this phase of the conflict undoubtedly occurred on the net. Both corporate and mercenary netrunners released a new generation of viral programs. One of these included the Soul Killer, which could back up and then trap a human consciousness while simultaneously killing its original host body. These viral programs lingered on the net, the code often operating long after the deaths of their creators, and leaving vast expanses of the net either dark or irreparably damaged. In June of 2022, Militech and Arasaka dropped all pretenses of secrecy and escalated the conflict into its third phase, the Hot War, a full-scale conflict that left many cities like Rio de Janeiro literally reduced to rubble. The populations of the affected cities were either completely exterminated or made refugees by the widespread destruction. Global trade was almost completely paralyzed by the Hot War, with international trade routes hit especially hard as a new age of piracy raged. The net was likewise ravaged by thousands of malicious viruses and programs, effectively killing the internet as we know it. The economies of several markets once again collapsed, and several countries finally decided to step in. Many openly blamed Militech and Arasaka for the deteriorating global situation, and some even nationalized the weakened holdings and resources of the two companies within their borders. The Free State of Southern California, for example, seized the LA headquarters of both Militech and Arasaka, with Texas and many European countries following suit. Finally, the Arasaka towers in Night City were destroyed by a tactical nuclear explosion detonated by a group of unidentified mercenaries. Some sources implicated a so-called Atlantis group, supposedly consisting of modern legends like Morgan Blackhand, Rogue, and Johnny Silverhand. Blackhand and Silverhand were never seen again after this incident, but Rogue has repeatedly denied participation in the operation. If you would like to know the truth of this encounter, I covered it in far more detail in a piece about the life and death of Johnny Silverhand, which you can watch by clicking the eye in the top right-hand corner of your screen right now. By the end of 2023, with the world in shambles and the assets of both companies greatly depleted, Arasaka finally conceded defeat, while under a great deal of pressure from the Japanese government. Despite their victory, Militech had been crippled by the Fourth Corporate War, perhaps at a scale equal to their rival. It took more than a decade for the world to even somewhat recover from this global devastation, and many of those years were not easy or peaceful. Riots raged, and rebellions had been sparked worldwide. South America was in complete political turmoil, and many European and Asian companies attempted to ease tensions and revive global trade by regulating the surviving corporations within their borders. In the United States, President Elizabeth Crest declared martial law in the portions of the country that remained under her control. Despite the true blame resting on a gang of American-backed Black Op mercenaries, Arasaka was held responsible for the nuclear explosion in Night City. Regardless, public sentiment pointed to Militech as the originator of the strike team and supplier of the nuke. President Crest exploited this sentiment, seizing Militech's assets despite the lack of hard evidence against them. Many of Militech's executives were quickly exonerated and given positions of power within the reformed Department of Defense. The remaining Militech assets were then used to strengthen the American military. Despite promises of aid, Crest declined to send any substantive help to the ruins of Night City, hoping that it would bring the Free State of Northern California to heal. They refused to concede, however, and the people of the city began to rebuild themselves. As countries looked inward and corporations struggled to survive, let alone thrive, technological development completely stagnated for decades. As a result, the nomads became the lifeblood of what was left of the tech industry, scrounging through abandoned battlefields and ruined facilities for goods to smuggle into the heavily restricted cities of the world. Things on the net did not fare much better. After years of attempts to resuscitate the poisoned areas of the net from the self-aware combat programs unleashed during the war, NetWatch established the Black Wall, a virtual barrier between the human-controlled and intelligence system-controlled regions of the net. The magnitude of the project was so massive that it fueled conspiracy theories that the humans of Netwatch had to strike deals with the self-aware intelligence systems to build the Black Wall. Over the next 35 years, the world slowly returned to a new normal. Cities were rebuilt, trade re-established, damaged infrastructure repaired, and technology once again became ubiquitous. Many US cities abandoned during the collapse of the 1990s through the 2010s were repopulated with government and corporate aid. Corporations saw the reconstruction projects as an opportunity to correct the negative public opinion they earned during the wars. It also allowed them to re-establish their influence over pop culture. In Europe, the older, established megacorporations were contested by new upstarts, most of which were backed and controlled by various European governments. Night City, feeling abandoned by the US government, was rebuilt by its citizens with the aid of the nomads and smaller corporations. Rumors of the government involvement in the Arasaka nuclear disaster began to spread, and it became popular opinion within the population that they would rather see the return of Arasaka than submit to US oversight and control. For their part, Arasaka took their defeat with dignity, spending a significant portion of their remaining capital on war reparations. However, they were then soon offered a handful of profitable contracts, allowing them to regain their position as a leader in weapons manufacturing and security. Still, a growing unrest within the company saw CEO Saburo Arasaka face internal opposition, as a secret civil war brewed within the company ranks. Finally, new isolated networks began to emerge, though mostly through regional intranets. The connections between these networks were carefully controlled and closely supervised by Netwatch, though their authority was limited in Europe and Oceania. This new net is far less available to the public, harder for netrunners to hack, and more secure for sensitive data. Unfortunately, this tenuous peace was not to last. In 2069, Rosalind Myers was elected President of the United States under a platform of reunification, intent on extending federal rule over the free states to strengthen America. Most of the independent territories, however, opposed this fiercely. Conflict was inevitable. The new United States, backed by the Militech forces they absorbed, declared war on a loose alliance of separatist states, including Colorado, New Mexico, Wyoming, Montana, Arizona, Nevada, and Northern California. The states of the Pacific Northwest, Washington, Oregon, and Idaho managed to remain neutral at the price of some political concessions to the new United States. Southern California surprisingly sided with the NUS. Arasaka secretly backed the Free States with weaponry and advisors, but the NUS pressed them hard. The ensuing conflict was the first in decades fought with cutting-edge military technology, and would become known as the Metal Wars. Due to the NUS control of Southern California, the people of Night City knew an invasion was imminent. By early 2070, NUS Army divisions had advanced to the outskirts of the city, but Night City Councilman Lucius Rain capitalized on contracts he made during his public service and called in some favors, reaching out to Arasaka to ask them for protection. Within days, an Arasaka supercarrier arrived, and just hours later the NUS forces had withdrawn from Night City. With Arasaka now openly entering the conflict on the side of the Free States, both factions actively sought an armistice. They did not want a repeat of the Fourth Corporate War. Eventually, the Treaty of Unification was signed by both the new United States and Free States coalition. This allowed the Free States to retain autonomy, but obligated them to participate in the new United States federal government and cease all hostilities amongst themselves. The treaty was unsatisfactory for all parties involved, but it was agreed that the imperfect peace was preferable to continuing the Metal Wars and potentially risking another global conflict. As they came to a close, the Metal Wars would collectively become known as the Unification War. Night City, still feeling burned by the lack of governmental aid after the devastation caused by the Fourth Corporate War, became an independent city-state, free from the laws of both the state of Northern California and the new United States. However, this freedom was paid for by a further increase in megacorporate influence. Many international corporations flooded money into Night City with the hopes of establishing a foothold on the west coast of America. This influence was symbolically cemented when Night City allowed Arasaka to build a new American headquarters in their downtown, on the very site where their previous headquarters had been destroyed in 2023. Still, Night City began to prosper, though that prosperity was not equally enjoyed by all. Sadly, though not unexpectedly, the end of the Unification War did not turn the world into a utopia. There are many issues still facing the planet by the late 2070s. Though the technological recession between the 2020s and 2040s had lowered global pollution, climate change was still greatly damaging and unpredictable. Hurricanes and tornadoes of enormous scale and power became more frequent, decimating population centers. Haiti had to be officially abandoned in 2062 after hundreds of thousands died during such storms. The devastation of the Caribbean is considered amongst the worst natural disasters of the entire 21st century. The population of South America became endangered by deforestation and desertification, as well as vast regions of every continent except Antarctica. Clean water has become scarce, while, ironically, floods have destroyed large sections of cities like Los Angeles and Night City. The Netherlands similarly lost 1/3 of their territory, with new dam-building technology pioneered to combat the threat of further flooding, and only just saving the rest of their country from submerging into the North Sea. The Maldives were not as fortunate. The entire archipelago sank in around 2057. Soil depletion led to famines that cost the lives of hundreds of thousands across Asia and Africa. The continents were only spared from complete extinction by new hydroponic technologies and vertical city farms. Cyber technology also progressed, though not without introducing its own set of new issues. The most common of these is cyberpsychosis. Sufferers of this mental illness isolate themselves to the point that human interaction becomes emotionally exhaustive and aggravating, and it runs the risk of growing into pure contempt for other people. This, of course, has the chance to progress to violence. The diagnosis is not new and has been recognized for over half a century, but newer studies have suggested that the quantity of an individual's augmentations can increase the chance of cyberpsychosis, an obvious issue when the entire population of Earth has become more and more dependent on their augmentations. And on top of all of these other problems, social strife has only increased. Stratification is common, the crime rate has grown to an enormous size, and there is unrest in almost every part of the world. Things in the cyberpunk universe are far from okay, and we are surely going to encounter the fallout of all of these problems in the forthcoming Cyberpunk 2077. A major theme of that game is going to be that humanity needs to reevaluate their moral values. But is it too late for that? And what are we gonna do about it? The release of that game is fast approaching, and I cannot wait to get my hands on it. And as we get closer and closer, I'm going to be making more and more videos about the Cyberpunk universe. So don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more if you want to check these out. And you can ring the bell to make sure you never miss a single one of them. If you want more Cyberpunk right now, you can watch the video I did analyzing the life and death of Johnny Silverhand, and speculating on how exactly he's going to show up in Cyberpunk 2077. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.